Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Switch gears, and I want to kind of do a little bit of a follow-up from the big story on Sunday that we talked about in the world of college football. That was a decision that I am still a little bit surprised by. Jedd Fisch deciding to leave Arizona for Washington. When we recorded on Sunday, we frankly, it was kind of on the 1 yard line. He hadn't officially accepted it, but it was obvious that he was going to. And so in a minute, I want to get to the ramifications for Arizona, the players that could potentially leave, who could potentially be next, and then bluntly, the tie between the two. Do you hire somebody who can retain the roster? Do you not? We'll get to all that in a minute. But first off, like now that it's official, now that Jedd Fisch has the purple background on Twitter and he's got the fake Washington visor on, I'll be honest, I am still stunned that this happened. Now, listen, I know Washington fans are going to get in their feelings and get mad. I'm not saying your job is bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. And I understand that the money is unbelievable and hard to turn down. At the same time, though, for the people that are like, oh, you have to take the Big Ten job over the Big 12 job, I completely disagree. There's a 12-team playoff with, at least for the next few years, 5 automatic bids. And so for Jedd Fisch, one, again, I get that the money's amazing. I really, truly, genuinely do. I also understand that you're making pretty good money at Arizona. You're due for a raise on a contract extension that's been sitting on your desk. But most importantly, and this is the important part to me, is that if you have the level of success next year that we all think you're capable of, I'll be honest, Washington fans, I'm sorry, but better opportunities will present themselves. Jedd Fisch is a Florida alum. Florida is going to open next year. Like, I'm sorry, Billy Napier. I hate to burst your bubble. Good luck. Prove me wrong, but I don't think you're getting a year 4 based on the way things are going. And so from the Jedd Fisch perspective, I get the money's great, but I think there's going to be better opportunities in the future. And I think there's frankly, potentially NFL opportunities as well. And so look, if this was a Michigan, as an example, if Jim Harbaugh leaves for the NFL, and by the time you listen to this, he might, that's one thing. If it was Ohio State, if it was Bama, if it was one of those schools, like I get it, but Washington going into the Big Ten, it isn't a move I would have made, but the decision was made. It's his life. He can do whatever he wants, whatever. I bring it up to very simply say, now the question becomes, like, what the heck is next? By the way, I didn't even touch on the fact that most insincere goodbye ever. This was a guy that built the entire program on trust and values and accountability and this and that. And I know all coaches say it, but apparently the meeting was like less than 3 minutes that he met with the team. Oh, thanks for all the sacrifices you guys made. I'm going to take that big bag over at Washington. By the way, that's especially interesting in an offseason where we all know that some of Arizona's most high-profile players got some major NIL offers. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. The Jedd Fisch era is in the past, and now it's time to talk about the future, because I do think there are 2 very interesting questions for Arizona. One, the first question is who's next? That's the big obvious one. We all know that. But 2, it is what happens to an unbelievable roster, a roster that was set to return 18 starters off of a 10-win football team this year. And don't tell me they didn't beat anybody, okay? They beat Oklahoma in the bowl game. They beat Utah. They beat UC. Like, they beat a lot of really good teams this season. And so now the question becomes, who do you get, and can he retain this roster? And that's where I want to start, because this roster has some dudes. I saw my buddy Josh Pate, 24/7 Sports, say this. He said on whatever day it was, Sunday afternoon, I guess. He said something to the effect of, Arizona has dudes, plural, on this roster that could impact the national championship race next year if they go to the right spot. And so the question is, does that happen? Where could they potentially end up? And can Arizona hire somebody that can convince them to stay? So I want to start with the Arizona transfer portal side of things. First off, Arizona got some bad news on Monday morning. Their leading rusher, Jonah Coleman, has decided to transfer. And again, by the way, it's worth noting, there's a lot of guys that are going to enter the portal, see what their options are, and maybe, frankly, come back to where they are right now. So that's always in the cards. I don't ever want to assume that guys are not going to come back. But Jonah Coleman, 871 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, decided to enter the portal. That's crushing. That's disappointing for Arizona. You hope the next head coach can retain him. The two big names, though, that the next head coach absolutely has to retain, no doubt about it. Obviously, the quarterback, Noah Fafita, and the wide receiver, who I believe is one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers in college football next year, like a legitimate first-team All-American type name, Tetairoa McMillan, T-Mac, 5-star, future first-round NFL draft pick. Let me just say this. If he enters the portal, and again, if he does, I'm not going to blame him. I'm not here to criticize anybody. If he enters the portal, I think you are talking about legitimately maybe the best individual player to enter the portal this entire offseason. I mean, the impact that he can have is right up there with Walter Nolan, who committed Ole Miss from Texas A&M, Evan Stewart. Like, as good as you think Evan Stewart is, Tetairoa McMillan is, at least production-wise, significantly better. And so let's dive into both of them. And one thing, by the way, that I don't do, until a kid enters the portal, we don't do lists, we don't speculate, we don't whatever. But this is the big question at Arizona right now. Can you retain those two guys? And I do think Tetairoa McMillan, T-Mac, is the guy that is basically the most interesting name that could potentially become available. This is a guy, people don't realize, he was the highest ranked recruit in Arizona football history, was originally committed to Oregon. And when Mario Cristobal left for Miami, decided, you know what, I'm going to open things up. I'm going to see what else is out there, and ended up at Arizona. Part of why he ended up at Arizona, Noah Fafita, his high school quarterback, ended up there. But this was a guy, listen, high 4-star, fringe 5-star, goes to Arizona. And to his credit, he didn't just meet the expectations, he exceeded them. The stats this year are insane. 90 catches this season, 1,400 yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, and the guy averaged something crazy like 15 yards per reception. I mean, you just go back to some of these stat lines, and it is banana land how good this kid was. 90 catches, as I said, 1,400 yards in the bowl game against Oklahoma. I mean, Brent Venables, one of the great defensive minds, did not have an answer for him. 160 yards on 10 catches against Arizona State, 11 catches for 266 yards. Final 4 games, at least 100 yards receiving. This kid is as good as any receiver in college football next year. I'm not even kidding. And I think if he were to enter the portal, and we know how this stuff works, we know that his family or his representation or whatever, I guarantee they're getting hit up. But there are guys that when they enter the portal, you think the demand, the interest is going to be higher than it is. I guarantee you, if this kid were to enter the portal, every school in America would be interested. I'm talking Alabama. I'm talking LSU. I'm talking Ohio State. I'm talking Penn State, Texas, whoever you deem to be those best of the best programs, Oregon for sure, where he once was committed. And so that is the kid you have to keep. And then obviously Noah Fafita is the other one. I mean, Noah Fafita is such a great story. Okay. For people who don't know the Noah Fafita story, this is a kid like 5'10", 5'11". All he does is win everywhere he goes. Was great in high school. Was the backup this year to Jayden de Laura. Jayden de Laura gets hurt. He goes in, starts game 1, loses in like triple overtime to USC. Game 2 faces Washington, ironically enough. And they lose by a touchdown to the eventual national runners-up. And so fast forward, final 7 games, he wins all 7. Beats everybody. Utah, Oklahoma, on and on and on and on and on. And he is a guy he was phenomenal. I mean, this was a guy, 2,400 yards in less than 10 starts. 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 74% completion percentage. That sounds made up. 74% completion percentage against some good defenses in the Pac-12. UCLA was an elite defense. Utah was an elite defense. This guy was awesome. And so the question now becomes, 1, are they going to stay? But 2, and I think this is the more important part, do you hire a coach who gives you a better chance to retain them, or do you decide to go outside of the family? And I'll say this. If it comes down to, and I should even backtrack. So there is a guy named Johnny Nansen, okay? For people who are not familiar with that name, he was the defensive coordinator and inside linebackers coach at Arizona this year. He recently left to go to Texas. There is already talk that he could potentially come back. He could potentially become the head coach. If he was, that all those guys would stay. I think my buddy Jason Shear put it out there, or it's at least been insinuated that if Nansen comes back as the head coach, Fafita will stay, T-Mac will stay, and you largely keep that roster intact. Here's what I have to say about that. I feel like Forrest Gump. That's all I have to say about that. What I have to say about that is pretty straightforward. If Nansen gives you the chance to keep this roster together, and if it guarantees, I think there, has to be some sort of verbal understanding that everybody stays. Generally, I'm not in favor of making a hire to keep a roster together, but in this case, I absolutely, positively, 100% am, and let me explain why. Listen, I understand the idea. You don't want to give the players too much power, control, whatever, right? We see it everywhere. NFL right now, Las Vegas Raiders. Max Crosby said, I'm demanding a trade if Antonio Pierce isn't the head coach, okay? So I bring all of it up to say, I get players vocalizing and speaking about what they want. I don't blame them. I would try to use whatever power I have as well. But in this case, I think the players' voices have to be heard, and I think they have to be acknowledged and respected. Because here's the thing. If you bring in somebody else and you can't retain these guys, it is a complete rebuild. If these guys go somewhere else and you're starting from the ground up, then you're right back to where Jedd Fisch was 3 years ago when he inherited a team that won one game in year one. If you get rid of these guys, you're going to have a rebuild anyway. So what is the harm in bringing in a guy that is going to retain this roster? Now, you're going to lose a player or two or three or five. That's the nature of this beast. But if you can largely keep this roster together, here's the crazy part. You bring in an outsider, it completely falls apart. You have to rebuild. And then, oh, by the way, in 5 years, if you get the right guy, maybe he's out the door like Jedd Fisch. But the opposite is true as well. If you keep this roster intact, let's say they do go 10-2. Let's say they do win the Big 12 next year. Well, guess what? Now you get to build momentum off of the foundation that is already there. And so on top of that, one, you have a better chance of having a high level of success. Two, even if you don't, you still have a little bit of a foundation. But three, to me, and I think this is an important part, Fafita is such a key piece, okay? And I said this in the Jedd Fisch thing. I said the number one thing has to be to keep Fafita. Keep in mind, he was T-Mac's high school teammate. So my guess is if you retain Fafita, if he believes in the coach, then you probably keep T-Mac as well, okay? But beyond that, and this to me is where it gets important, Fafita is a redshirt freshman. Fafita, in theory, has 3 years of eligibility left after this season if he chooses to come back to Arizona. And so I bring it up because this isn't just a one-year commitment. It's not like all these guys are seniors and you're just trying to go out with a bang and then you got to start over anyway. This is, what if you do go 10-2 next year and go to the playoff and you bring back the quarterback the following year? Now you'll lose T-Mac, but you can keep everybody else in place. And so to me, that's why you have to do it. I don't know what Dave Hickey, the AD at Arizona, is going to do, but to me, this is a no-brainer. And by the way, it's not like, and this is no disrespect, but it's not like you're Alabama or Ohio State and you can do a national search and you can pluck a guy from some amazing job that nobody else can get. You're not going to get the kind of candidate that universally everybody is on board with. And by the way, here's the reality. Even if you think you're going to hit a home run, not everyone's going to be on board with it. I can tell you right now, I know enough people in Alabama to know. Not everybody's sold on Kalen freaking DeBoer, who, oh, by the way, just played for a national championship. So I just bring it up to very simply say, if you are Arizona, this is the move that I would absolutely make, because I truly believe in my heart of hearts that if Nansen is hired, the roster will stay together. And if it is, that is a team to win and win big. But the number one thing, you got to keep McMillan. You got to keep Fafita out of the portal. You keep those two, I think the rest of the roster largely stays in place.